A cold silver tray was placed in front of her. On it sat nothing but a dry, hardened sandwich and a half-empty glass of water. In a first-class cabin filled with the scent of fine wine and the delicate clink of crystal, that sight landed like an invisible slap across Aurora Bennett's face. She froze. Her deep black eyes, calm yet tight like the surface of a lake about to erupt into a storm, followed the retreating figure of Paige Holloway, the flight attendant whose hollow smile had vanished the moment she turned her back. Aurora did not touch the sandwich. She did not lift the glass. She sat still, letting the humiliation seep through her veins, engraving every detail into memory, so it would never be forgotten. Around her, the other passengers, all white men in tailored suits, kept laughing softly as their glasses chimed. They did not notice. Or rather, they were far too used to seeing someone pushed out of this world, too accustomed to watching an outsider get sidelined as they lifted their champagne without the slightest pause. Aurora knew this was no mistake. A week ago, she had ordered her meal. Lobster bisque, prime steak, Chateau Margaux. It had been confirmed by email, text message, and a phone call from the airline. There was no such thing as out of stock, no such thing as system error. This was a choice, a deliberate one. Paige had not even tried to conceal it. Her indifference, her glance that slid past Aurora as if she did not exist, the careless shrug, they mirrored every moment Aurora had endured before. Discrimination does not need to shout. It hides in the small gestures, in the extra seconds of withheld service, in the way a tray is handed with quiet disdain. Aurora sat in seat 1A, the very first seat of first class, the position people who are used to power often claim as their private territory. To them, Aurora was a strange exception, a woman of color sitting where they believed she did not belong. Paige thought Aurora would stay silent. Everyone in that cabin thought she would comply. But they forgot one thing. Aurora Bennett was not the kind of person who swallows humiliation in silence. She lifted her head. Her sharp gaze swept across the cabin. Victor Lang, the male attendant, was bowing low before Edward Harrington, Colin Doyle, and Miles Pierce, three investors well known in elite circles. Their champagne glasses were filled to the brim, caviar gleaming under the golden light. Aurora's chest tightened, not out of envy for the food, but because she saw the naked truth. In this space of luxury, respect was rationed by skin color. Memories surged back. She remembered being 26, giving her first presentation on AI security in Palo Alto, when the very first question the seven men asked was, "Do you actually do the technical work, or are you just the marketing co-founder?" She remembered at 34, standing on a stage in London, when a journalist asked, "Was your success due to luck or gender quotas?" Every word, every doubtful stare, had carved deep lines into her soul. And Aurora had answered the world with resounding success, with Bennett Dynamics valued in the tens of billions, with Forbes naming her 3 years in a row. And yet, here she was at 30,000 feet, history repeating itself, condensed into a single tray of food. Paige's heels clicked down the carpeted aisle once more, her stride pounding with arrogant rhythm. Aurora raised an eyebrow. She said nothing, but her eyes, The very gaze Silicon Valley rivals once called the look that breaks the board locked onto her. Aurora was not angry. Anger is too easy to show. The real test is to hold it in, to channel it into a blow that cuts deep and strikes true. Then came a laugh, sharp and disdainful, from the row behind. Harrington had made a crude joke about Asian markets being easier than European ones. Colin Doyle responded, his tone mocking. As long as no one tries to bring any unfamiliar skin tones into the boardroom. Aurora heard every word. They had not said her name. They did not need to. The air itself had made her the target. Aurora rested her hand lightly on the sandwich tray. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the force of memories boiling inside her. She remembered her grandmother's words. They can take away what's in your hands, but they can never take away how you respond. Aurora exhaled slowly, closed her eyes for a few seconds, then opened them with a gaze transformed, cold, sharp, resolute. Paige believed she had won. This cabin believed Aurora would stay silent. They were wrong. Aurora leaned slightly, pulling a tablet from her Hermes bag. Her fingers moved swiftly across the screen, accessing the partner portal reserved for Diamond Plus elite clients. Personnel files and internal records unfolded before her. Within moments, one name appeared. Paige Holloway, Senior Cabin Crew, ID ST A9035. Beneath it, a string of unresolved complaints. Aurora allowed herself a thin smile. The first piece of the puzzle was hers. She did not need to shout. She did not need to fight. All she needed was a signal. At that moment, Aurora sent an encrypted message to her assistant, Nia Carter, waiting at the Bennett Dynamics office in New York. Activate emergency audit protocol. Flight 91. Cabin crew ST. Confirm in 10 minutes. Short. Calm. But behind it, a storm was gathering. A storm Paige Holloway and Stratus Air itself had no idea was already being unleashed from Seat 1A. Aurora sat upright, her lips pressed tight, her gaze steady ahead. She did not want the sandwich. She did not want an apology. She wanted the truth exposed. First class sank back into the murmur of clinking glasses and casual chatter. But inside Aurora's mind, another drumbeat was sounding. Not the rhythm of a fine dinner, but the rhythm of an indictment ready to shake the entire world of luxury aviation. And she was its center. In the very moment when first class filled again with laughter and the delicate chime of crystal, half a world away on the 42nd floor of the Bennett Dynamics Tower in Manhattan, a giant screen lit up in an empty office. Nia Carter, 29, Aurora's executive assistant, had just received the encrypted message. She sat alone, the lights off, only the glow of the monitor reflecting against her black-rimmed glasses. When she read the words, Emergency Audit Protocol, Flight 917, ST, A9035, her blood seemed to freeze. Nia had seen Aurora deploy this method once, and only once, 2 years ago, when Bennett Dynamics forced a major investment bank to bow its head and admit to discriminatory lending practices against startups. The result then was the immediate closure of an entire trading floor, and the branch director vanished from the financial world overnight. Naya's hands trembled for an instant, but her eyes flared with resolve. No one understood better than her that when Aurora sent the red signal, it meant someone had touched her deepest wound, the silent contempt reserved for those deemed unworthy. She pushed her chair closer and let her fingers fly across the keyboard. Lines of code poured down the screen like rain. She connected to the Aviation Partner Network, an API accessible only to Bennett Dynamics and a handful of global security firms. Each keystroke was a heartbeat, each command a drill into the data core. In less than 90 seconds, a profile appeared. Paige Holloway. Senior. Cabin crew, Stratus Air, ID ST A9035. The records looked clean, but Naya's sharp eyes spotted cracks. 2 passenger complaints logged, both dismissed as insufficient evidence. An internal email with a chilling note: prioritize passengers who tip well, don't waste time. Naya's lip curled. No direct proof, but everyone knew what that language meant. She pulled up international passenger feedback archives. A pattern emerged from scattered reports. February 2022. An African businessman denied his ordered wine with no explanation. September 2022. 2 Asian passengers reported being served last, despite sitting in first class. March 2023. An Indian businesswoman pressed the call button 3 times and received no response. Each record ended the same way. Insufficient evidence. Naya closed her eyes briefly, her palm clenched into a fist. They always used the same shield. Not enough proof, insufficient grounds for action. But Aurora and Nia knew the truth. If enough fragments were pieced together, the picture would expose everything. She launched a tool she and Aurora had built, the Bias Recognition Index. Cabin audio logs, response times, tone of voice, even facial expressions from internal cameras were fed into the algorithm. A number flashed bright red, 87.4%. Repeated bias against non-white passengers. Naya let out a short laugh. It was not a laugh of joy, but of scorn, directed at a system that prided itself on being professional. She whispered, "Aurora, you were right. They thought this was about a meal. But this is the spark that will burn the whole forest." Her fingers hammered the keys. A classified report took form. Systemic discrimination, Flight 917, Crew ST A9035. The attachments included video, service logs, bias analysis. Before sending, she added one final line in cold clarity. Recommend immediate investigation of organizational culture. Brand risk assessed as critical. Within 3 minutes, 3 emails were dispatched simultaneously to Charles Edmonds, 50 bis 6, Global CEO of Stratus Air, and a long-time ally of Bennett Dynamics, to the head of Stratus Legal, and to Aurora Bennett herself. Status: sent, encrypted, irrevocable. Naya removed her glasses and leaned back. Her heart pounded, but her lips curved into a thin smile. She knew, from that moment, the rules of the game had changed. Across the ocean, Aurora still sat silently in seat 1A, her gaze fixed on the endless night sky beyond the window. No one in the cabin knew that the subtle flicker of light on her wrist had activated a vast engine of data, and that a strategic investigation was already underway before the plane had even touched down. Paige Holloway still wore her ingratiating smile as she poured champagne for Harrington, adjusted napkins for Doyle, and bowed politely to Pierce. She believed she controlled the cabin, but the truth was, she had stepped directly into killing ground, where every action, every glance, every smile would become evidence. Aurora closed her eyes, calm and unflinching. Inside her, the storm had already begun, and this time it would not stop at a sandwich tray. First class was as quiet as a closed stage. Warm golden light fell across the polished wooden tables. Crystal glasses gleamed with sharp reflections. But Aurora Bennett saw no light at all. The only thing before her was the cold silver tray, a cheap chicken sandwich, wilted lettuce, a crumpled napkin. It was a mark, a statement without words. You do not belong here. Aurora drew a long breath, pressing it down into her chest, then lifted her head. Her gaze was a thin blade cutting through the veil of pretense. Everything seemed to slow. The clink of glasses, the bursts of laughter from behind, the faint tap of shoes on carpet. But inside Aurora, a storm was already swirling. She pressed the call button on her armrest. The soft chime was so quiet, most passengers did not notice. But Victor Lang, a middle-aged flight attendant with carefully groomed salt and pepper hair, came at once. He bent slightly, his voice polite. "Miss Bennett, how may I assist you?" Aurora tilted her head, a faint smile touching her lips, though her eyes were cold as steel. "I only have one question, Mr. Lang. In Stratus policy, when first-class meals are pre-ordered, what criteria determine who is prioritized when the meals run short?" The question fell like a hidden trap. Victor froze, blinking rapidly. Before he could answer, Aurora continued, her voice calm yet unyielding. "I am a Diamond Plus member. I placed my order 7 days ago. I received multiple confirmations. So why am I the only passenger in this cabin denied the meal I selected?" The air grew heavier. Victor's eyes flicked quickly to the back, where Harrington laughed loudly. Doyle swirled his glass of wine, and Pierce leaned in conversation. He swallowed hard, stammering. It could be that the system failed to update. Sometimes the crew must prioritize based on circumstance." Aurora's smile widened just slightly, light as air, but enough to chill Victor's spine. "Prioritize? Then tell me, what exactly defines priority here? Familiarity or skin color?" Victor went rigid, sweat breaking across his brow despite the cool cabin air. He bowed lower. I fear this is simply a miscommunication." Aurora said nothing more. She tilted her head, smile intact, and turned her eyes back to the window. No further answer was needed. His silence was enough. At the rear, Paige Holloway stood with a tray of wine, her eyes briefly sweeping over Aurora before she quickly looked away. Her smile brightened as she poured champagne for Harrington, leaned deeper than necessary as she set a glass before Doyle, her fingers brushing Pierce's hand as she offered him a napkin, her glance filled with suggestion. Aurora watched all of it in silence. Every smile, every nod, Every gesture of favoritism was etched into her steel memory, and within her, anger rose, not loud or explosive, but slow and searing, like magma beneath a volcano's crust. She believes she is winning, Aurora thought, but every move she makes is becoming evidence. Very soon, the system itself will testify against her. Paige did not know the entire cabin was under camera surveillance. More importantly, she did not know the data was being analyzed in real time by Nia Carter across the ocean. Aurora let her eyes drift shut. Behind her lids, an old image flared, herself at 33, standing before the sterling Capital Investment Board. One man had not even looked at her, instead turning to his secretary with the words, "Coffee, hurry up." Aurora had smiled and replied, "I'll bring the coffee if you let me present a $15 million plan right after." The room fell silent, and from that day, no one ever mistook her for the help again. This would be no different. Paige thought Aurora was merely a difficult passenger. In truth, Aurora was the epicenter of a quake, already shaking the Stratus system. She opened her eyes and looked directly at Victor, her voice soft but weighted like stone. "No need to answer further. I already understand." Victor bowed lower still, retreating faster than usual, like a man escaping the stand in a courtroom. Aurora exhaled lightly, pressing her wrist. Her smartwatch buzzed, displaying Nia's encrypted message. "Confirmed. File ST A9035. Shows repeated bias. Red protocol activated." Aurora gave the slightest nod. No one else in the cabin realized that with a few short lines of text, an entire audit machine had been unleashed. Paige Holloway still believed she controlled this flight. But Aurora knew better. She had already seized the board, and the next step would not be questions. It would be judgment. In the Manhattan office of Bennett Dynamics, the wall clock struck 2 a.m. Outside, the city still glowed like a network of steel arteries. But inside Nia Carter's office, the air was so heavy it felt as if it could be cut into slices. Nia had just completed the final report. On the screen, the title glared back at her. Systemic Bias Report, Stratus Air, Flight 917, Cabin Crew ST, A9035. Every attached file was a blade. Response time statistics of the crew, cabin video from the internal cameras showing Paige Holloway serving Harrington, Doyle, and Pierce with radiant smiles, while Aurora was left unattended. The meal order log, confirming Aurora's request from 7 days earlier, crossed out from the service list. The bias recognition index reading 87.4%, a level in the red zone. Nia inhaled deeply and pressed send. The encrypted message flew off within seconds, slipping through firewalls, landing in the priority inboxes of 3 people. Charles Edmonds, CEO of Stratus Air, Elise Novak, Head of Service Culture, and the Global Chief Legal Officer. In the Stratus Air headquarters in Geneva, half a world away, Charles's phone buzzed. He was in a boardroom on the 20th floor, preparing for a financial signing scheduled for the morning. When he saw the sender's name, Bennett Dynamics, Priority Audit, his brow furrowed. He knew Aurora Bennett never sent a report unless it was critical. Charles opened the file. As he read the first lines, his face darkened. Numbers, videos, images. all pointed to one undeniable truth. First class on Flight 917 was a ticking bomb. He set the phone down and signaled to his assistant. "Cancel every meeting tomorrow morning. Activate Protocol Red Line. I want the entire HR and legal teams from Geneva at the airport when Flight 917 lands." His assistant's eyes widened. "Sir, Red Line is only used for incidents with global brand impact." "Exactly," Charles cut him off, his tone sharp. "And this is that level." Within moments, alarms spread across the network. Regional directors in Zurich, Paris, and London all received the same code. Red Line 917. The company servers automatically archived all cabin data, locking it so it could not be altered. A chain of dominoes had been set in motion, and nothing could stop it. Back in New York, Naya leaned into her chair, her heart still racing. She removed her glasses and ran a hand through her tangled hair. On the screen, a green check confirmed the report had reached the CEO of Stratus. Naya whispered softly, half to Aurora, half to herself. "The wheel is already turning, Aurora. Now let them face the truth." She remembered Aurora's words to her. "Real power isn't in shouting the loudest. It's in forcing an entire system to converser." Tonight, Naya had triggered exactly that. Meanwhile, high above the Atlantic, Aurora still sat quietly in seat 1A. She had no idea that in Geneva, an entire leadership machine was in disarray because of a single sandwich. But she didn't need to know. For her, the silence of Paige and Victor had already become evidence stronger than any argument. The cabin lights dimmed. Passengers began reclining to rest. But Aurora kept her eyes open, staring into the endless night beyond the window. In her mind, every memory of contempt, every moment of exclusion, was merging into a single flame. She knew that when this plane landed, it would not only be a few crew members who paid the price. The entirety of Stratus Air would be forced to look into the mirror. And Aurora Bennett, the woman denied a meal, was the one pressing an empire to face its own shadow. The engines hummed softly as the plane drifted through layers of night clouds. First class glowed in a calm blue light. Passengers reclined in their seats, some under blankets, others pretending to sleep while still chuckling over champagne glasses. But Aurora Bennett did not. She sat upright in seat 1A, her eyes fixed beyond the glass into the ink-black sky. In that silence, the past returned in sharp, slow motion reels. Aurora remembered being 20-6, walking into a small meeting room in Palo Alto with a suitcase heavy with documents. 7 white men in tucked-in shirts, MacBooks open before them. They glanced at her and asked, half joking, half serious, "Are you really the one doing the tech, or just the founder in charge of marketing?" At that moment, Aurora smiled, a smile sharp as a blade. "If I only did marketing, then who would explain to you why my AI security model had the Pentagon signing contracts 3 years later?" The room fell silent. From that day on, no one dared to dismiss her as decoration beside a tech project again. She blinked, and another memory followed. At 34, standing at the London conference, flashbulbs exploding all around. A young reporter held up a microphone, his tone calm but steeped in bias. "As the first woman of color in the top 10 CEOs under 40, do you think your success came from luck or from gender equity policies. The room seemed to hold its breath. Aurora looked straight into the lens, smiling as her words cut clean. Success comes when you work 3 times as hard, are doubted 10 times as much, yet still move forward as if nothing can stop you. Those memories had never faded. They were etched in stone, cold and unyielding. And now, in the Stratus cabin, they rose again. Aurora laid her hand on the silver tray. The cold sandwich was still there. She neither ate it nor threw it away. She kept it as evidence. Because sometimes the smallest details reveal the harshest truths. Paige Holloway walked past, her eyes skimming Aurora as if she were invisible. Her smile was reserved for Edward Harrington and Colin Doyle, men whose business cards carried weight. Aurora watched every gesture. To Paige, Aurora was merely an inconvenient exception, but Aurora understood clearly that exception would be the stone to shatter the glass Paige hid behind. Aurora closed her eyes, letting the murmurs of the cabin fade. In that darkness, she saw another image. Her grandmother on the porch in Florida, beads in hand, her voice steady and warm. They will tell you that you do not belong, simply because they have never seen someone like you in that place. But do not let anger consume you. Let it become your light. Aurora pressed her lips together. Her grandmother had been right. Anger could easily become shouting, a noisy clash. But true power lay in composure, the kind that a system could not ignore. She opened her eyes and glanced at her wrist. The smart watch vibrated lightly. A new notification from Nia Carter appeared. Report sent. Red line 917 activated. The entire cabin is under surveillance. Stratus CEO has received it. Aurora leaned back slightly, breathing deep. The fire in her chest cooled, replaced by steel. The next move was no longer hers. It belonged to a system now spinning out of control. But she knew this much. Systems never change on their own. They have to be forced. And tonight, from a single cold sandwich, Aurora had dragged Stratus Air into the storm. Outside the window, the night sky was still thick, but at the horizon, a thin streak of light flickered. Aurora sipped her water slowly. She did not need expensive wine to prove her place. She only needed truth, and truth was drawing closer with every passing second. She whispered softly, only to herself. They think I am silent, but silence is my weapon. The plane kept cutting through the sky, bound for Geneva, and Aurora Bennett, the woman in seat 1A, was no longer just a passenger. She was a living indictment, an arrow flying straight into the heart of a culture too long hidden in shadow. At Stratus Air headquarters in Geneva, the digital clock in the conference room on the 21st floor flickered relentlessly. The ticking of the second hand pounded like the collective heartbeat in the room. Lights refused to sleep, and the LED wall projected a single line in blazing red. Red line 917. Emergency protocol activated. Charles Edmonds, the global CEO of Stratus, 56 years old with neatly cut grey hair, strode into the room. He had just left a major financial meeting, his tie still knotted tight. The room fell into silence. In front of him lay a stack of urgent documents, still reeking of fresh ink. "The situation?" Charles demanded, his voice edged like steel. Amélie Dupont, 30th and 8th, head of legal, rose to her feet. Her tone was firm, unyielding. We have received a direct report from Bennett Dynamics, the behavioral analysis of flight attendant Paige Holloway on Flight 917 indicates systemic bias. Cabin cameras, service logs, and response time metrics have all been verified. Charles flipped through the pages, eyes sharp. Images glared back at him. Paige setting a tray down in front of Aurora with indifference before walking away, then bending low with a dazzling smile to pour wine for Harrington, Doyle, and Pierce. Cold numbers spoke louder than pictures. Average response time for white passengers, 42 seconds. For Aurora Bennett, 6 minutes, 11 seconds. Elise Novak, head of service culture, 40th/6, slammed her hand on the table. This is no longer a service mishap. This is proof of a cultural disease. The room trembled. Voices rose, but Charles lifted his hand, silencing all. His tone dropped, deliberate and heavy. Do you all know who is sitting in seat 1A? All eyes turned. Elise whispered as if confessing. Aurora Bennett, CEO of Bennett Dynamics, the woman Forbes calls the icon of a new generation of tech. A stunned hush. Then a young manager dropped his pen, the small sound echoing like a death knell. Charles exhaled. He knew Aurora well. He had signed a cybersecurity deal with her back in 2019. He knew she never needed to shout. When she stayed silent, it meant she was preparing the decisive strike. And the report from Nia Carter was only the beginning. Then we have less than 8 hours to salvage the honor of Stratos, Charles said, his voice dry but commanding. When Flight 917 lands, the HR and legal teams in Geneva must be at the airport immediately. I want the entire crew pulled aside for investigation on the spot. Amélie nodded. We have already prepared an emergency meeting room at the VIP terminal. Lawyers are on site. Good, Charles snapped, and I want a public statement within 24 hours. If we fail to act, Stratos will be on every front page tomorrow, branded with one word, discrimination. No one objected. They all understood. Their careers, even the empire of Stratos itself, now stood on the edge of a cliff. Meanwhile, high above the Atlantic, Aurora sat still in seat 1A. She closed her eyes, letting the first-class cabin sink into the hum of soft snores and contented sighs of those who had dined well. But she knew that below, an earthquake had already begun. Victor Lang walked past, hesitating as if to speak, but then bowed his head and moved on in silence. Paige remained busy, pouring more wine for Harrington, giggling at Doyle's jokes. She had no idea that every smile was becoming evidence, every step leading her closer to a hidden tribunal. Aurora opened her eyes, staring into the empty space ahead. Her smartwatch vibrated with a new alert from Nia. Confirmed. Stratos CEO has personally activated Red Line 917. The investigation team will be waiting in Geneva. Aurora's lips curved. The smile was not for Paige, nor for Victor. It was for a single truth. The game had ended the moment she touched that cold sandwich. And now the plane was nothing more than a vehicle delivering Paige Holloway and the entire crew straight into a tribunal they never even knew awaited them. The airplane's wheels screeched against the runway, metal body shuddering as the engine slowed. In the first-class cabin, Silence lingered, broken only by a few sighs of relief. For most passengers, it was the routine end of another luxurious flight. But for Aurora Bennett, it was the opening of a battle long destined. She did not rush to unbuckle her seatbelt. While Harrington bent to pick up his briefcase, Doyle adjusted his scarf, and Pierce fumbled with his phone. Aurora sat upright, eyes half closed, wearing the composure of someone who already knew the game had tilted in her favor. The aircraft door opened. Cold Geneva air rushed in, carrying the sharp scent of a European airport. Aurora rose. Each step she took was slow, deliberate, echoing like a drumbeat, announcing something irreversible. At the end of the jet bridge, two figures in black suits awaited her. Stephen Moreau, 48, CEO of Stratus Europe, and Amélie Dupont, 38, head of legal in Geneva. Both bowed their heads as Aurora approached. "Welcome, Miss Bennett," Stefan began, his voice rough. "We." Aurora raised her hand, cutting him off. Her voice was calm, resonant. "No apologies. This is only the beginning." No more words, no handshake, no glance back. Aurora walked past, leaving behind two bowed faces, the faces of people who now understood that negotiations would no longer revolve around service, but around the very soul of a culture. Behind her, the crew of Flight 917 exited through a side door. Paige Holloway still wore a smile, convinced the ordeal was over. In her mind, perhaps only the thought of a lavish dinner at a Geneva hotel lingered, where she would regale friends with a story about a difficult passenger in seat 1A. But as she stepped into the corridor, she froze. 3 staff members in black suits, badges marked HR Crisis Unit, blocked the way. One of them raised a tablet, its screen displaying a stark message. "Flight 917 crew, please proceed to Emergency Meeting Room 2. The smile on Paige's lips vanished. She glanced around, desperate for a mistake, but the heavy gaze of her colleague Victor Lang told her otherwise. No one spoke. They followed silently, like witnesses summoned to a tribunal. In the VIP terminal, Aurora walked through polished glass corridors as security guards bowed and cleared the way. Reporters were kept outside, Stratus locking down the scene. But Aurora needed no cameras. She was already the storm's eye. Every glance from those passing by confirmed her presence, and the room itself seemed to hold its breath. Her phone vibrated in her bag. A message from Nia Carter. "The investigation has begun. Whitmore and the entire crew separated. Report now in Edmund's hands." Aurora closed the phone, her gaze fixed ahead, her expression cold and unwavering. She knew no further words were needed. The system itself would speak. In a crisis room across the hall, the crew of Flight 917 sat isolated, questioned one by one. Cameras rolled, lawyers observed, every word carved into record. For the first time in years, Paige Holloway had nowhere to hide. Her answers, trembling and clipped, echoed in the sterile air, captured forever. Meanwhile, Aurora settled into the back of a sleek black limousine waiting outside the VIP terminal. The door shut, cutting off the outside light. In the dim interior, she closed her eyes. The battle had shifted to other hands, but she knew one thing with certainty. From this moment on, Stratus would forever be tied to a cold sandwich and to the woman who turned it into a verdict against an entire culture. Geneva's lights glittered, but inside, Aurora lived only one certainty. The revolution had begun, and she, as always, remained silent in Seat 1A. The Stratus Air headquarters in downtown Geneva blazed with light through the night. The entire 15th floor, the strategic boardroom, was sealed shut. Bulletproof glass doors locked tight. Security guards lined the hallway. On the long oval table, crimson folders lay stacked in order, stamped with bold letters. Flight 917, Emergency Review. Charles Edmonds, Global CEO, entered with heavy steps. He removed his glasses, set them on the table, and fixed his gaze on the dozens of anxious faces before him. Regional directors, Chief Legal Officer Amélie Dupont, and Head of Service Culture Elise Novak. No one dared to speak first. Elise broke the silence. Her voice trembled slightly, but each word landed like a hammer. The report from Bennett Dynamics has been verified. We cannot deny it. Flight attendant Paige Holloway repeatedly displayed bias, deliberately neglecting passenger in Seat 1A, Aurora Bennett. Charles nodded slowly, then gestured. The massive LED screen lit up. Cabin camera footage appeared in sharp detail. Paige dropping a sandwich tray without a word, then turning immediately to pour wine for Harrington and Doyle, bowing lower than necessary in deference. Next, the system log. Lobster bisque plus prime steak. Booked 7 days in advance. Confirmed 3 separate times. Flagged unavailable. Amélie spoke firmly. This was not an error. This was cultural behavior. She did not need to speak slurs aloud. A shrug, a dismissive smile, that alone exposed the belief that Aurora did not belong in this cabin. Charles gripped the armrest of his chair. He had met Aurora before, had seen the sharp intelligence in her eyes. He knew that if Bennett had triggered an emergency audit, Stratus could no longer hide. His voice came out hoarse. Brand impact, Elise answered instantly. At this moment, hashtag Seat 1A is spreading across the networks. If Aurora speaks publicly, we have no chance of recovery. Even if she remains silent, her name alone carries enough weight to turn Stratus into the centerpiece of global condemnation. A regional director shifted nervously. Perhaps we can apologize privately, compensate her individually. Charles slammed his hand on the table. No. His voice cracked like a whip. Do you still not understand? This is not just an angry passenger. This is Aurora Bennett, the woman who can bring finance and technology to their knees with a single email. Compensation is not a solution. Reform is the answer. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the rustle of papers. Charles rose, stepping to the center of the room. His voice rang out, clear and decisive. From this moment forward, the entire crew of Flight 917 is suspended immediately. Paige Holloway will face an independent investigation for violation of ethical service standards. He paused, his eyes sweeping across every face. And more than that, Stratus will extend a formal invitation to Aurora Bennett, asking her to become our global service culture advisor, not to polish our reputation, but to change us at the root. A director objected, his face pale. You want to give a customer authority to rewrite our internal policies? That has never been done before." Charles turned, his gaze ice-cold. "Never been done before? That is exactly why Stratus has fallen into this disgrace. If we do not act, Stratus will become the textbook case of covert discrimination in luxury aviation. I will not allow my name to be tied to a rotting empire." No one spoke again. The air was thick with dread. Amelie nodded, her voice firm. "I will prepare a public statement. It will admit wrongdoing and pledge full reform." Charles sat back down, exhaling heavily. But in his eyes, determination blazed. He knew that from this moment, Stratus was no longer in control of the game. The person in command was the woman who had just walked out of seat 1A in silence. Across the city, Aurora sat in her hotel room overlooking Lake Geneva. Her phone buzzed. A new email appeared. "We sincerely apologize for what occurred. Stratus Air wishes to invite you to join our Global Service Culture Reform Program. This is not merely an invitation. It is recognition that you are the voice needed to lead change." Charles Edmonds. Aurora finished reading, tapping her fingers 3 times on the wooden desk. She did not smile. She did not rush to reply. She knew the battle was far from over. But in that moment, Stratus had already bent the knee to a cold sandwich. And this was only the beginning. The next morning, Geneva was bathed in a cold light, but the world was no longer the same. The entire luxury aviation industry was shaken as the first headlines appeared in the press. The New York Times, "Black CEO discriminated against on flight. Silence no longer holds power." The Guardian, "One meal denied. An entire system exposed." Forbes, "Aurora Bennett, from victim to the woman rewriting global service culture." And across social media, a hashtag surged like a storm. Seat 1A. It began with only a few hundred tweets, a handful of short clips showing Aurora being served a cold sandwich. But within 24 hours, millions had joined. Stories of pain and exclusion poured in from every corner. An Asian woman wrote that she had once been ignored in business class when asking for water. An African-American executive described being forgotten for his pre-ordered meal on 3 consecutive flights. An anonymous flight attendant confessed that the hidden culture of prioritizing passengers by status and appearance had existed for decades. Each story ended with the same line: "I was not in seat 1A, but I deserved respect." The movement grew so large that international news outlets launched dedicated coverage. CNN replayed the cabin video, the moment Aurora tilted her head and said softly, "I understand now." The BBC called it a quiet declaration stronger than any shout. In Stratus's New York office, inboxes collapsed under the weight of over 9,000 emails in just 12 hours, all demanding cultural reform. In London, 3 major investors simultaneously demanded a diversity and equity summit. Even the United States Department of Transportation called Charles Edmonds directly, demanding a formal report on systemic bias in luxury service. Meanwhile, Aurora sat in a small meeting room at a lakeside hotel in Geneva. In front of her were not reporters, but 3 young women of color working in the service industry. One of them, her voice trembling, asked, "We want to learn how to stand up like you. How did you make the world listen without ever raising your voice?" Aurora looked at them, her eyes solemn. Her voice was steady, every word sharp and clear. I did not need to shout. I let the system speak its own truth, and this time it could not turn away. Outside the glass, Lake Geneva lay still as a mirror, but Aurora knew that beneath the surface, the currents were surging. At Stratus headquarters, Charles Edmonds stepped into the press room. For the first time in the airline's history, he did not read a hollow statement. He bowed his head and admitted, "We have allowed subtle discrimination to exist for far too long. Beginning today, Stratus will undergo a complete reform, and we have extended an official invitation to Aurora Bennett, not only as a customer, but as a strategic advisor, to help us rewrite our service culture." Camera shutters clattered in rapid fire. Reporters were stunned. No one had expected a company once boasting the world's finest service to admit fault before the globe. Back at the hotel, Aurora opened her laptop. An email from Charles Edmonds appeared on the screen. "We would be honored to invite you to join our global reform program." She did not reply immediately. She only tapped her finger on the desk 3 times, not out of hesitation, but because she knew that her silence now carried more weight than 1,000 words. Social media burned on. Pictures of Seat 1A appeared from flights around the world, each one posted with the caption, "This seat is no longer a privilege, it is a reminder." And somewhere, in the hearts of millions who had once been dismissed, Aurora Bennett had become a symbol of a truth simple yet buried for far too long. Respect is not a reward, it is the standard. 3 days later in Geneva, Stratus Air held the largest press conference in its history. More than 50 international media outlets crowded the hall. Cameras, microphones, and flashes converged on the podium, where the spotlight fell like a beam of judgment. Charles Edmonds stepped forward. He wore a grey suit, a dark blue tie, his face hardened by 3 sleepless nights. He opened his notes, but then closed them immediately. In a firm voice, he admitted, "Stratus has failed, not a failure of technology or service, but a failure of culture. We allowed subtle discrimination to exist and to stain our port promise of luxury. From today, Stratus will undergo complete reform, with no exceptions." A barrage of flashes exploded. The press murmured, but the room fell silent again as Edmonds continued. "And I would like to introduce the person we have invited as our global cultural advisor, the one who reminded the world that silence itself holds power. The woman who sat in Seat 1A on Flight 917, Mrs. Aurora Bennett." A side door opened. Aurora entered, not in the commanding dark suits she was known for, but in an ivory suit, a small black swallow pin on her lapel. No glitter, no ornament, yet her presence made the entire hall fall still. Aurora carried no script. She only held the microphone, her eyes sweeping across hundreds of lenses before she spoke, her voice deep and deliberate. "I am not here to speak about a cold sandwich. I am here because Seat 1A does not belong to me alone. It is a symbol for everyone who has ever been dismissed, overlooked, or treated as if they did not belong." She paused, her gaze sharp, piercing the rows of reporters. "I do not ask for privilege. I ask for a standard. The standard that every customer, regardless of race, gender, or background, deserves respect." The room was silent as stone. A female journalist bowed her head, scribbling furiously. A middle-aged man at the back wiped his eyes with a tissue. Aurora lowered the microphone and added one final line. Never mistake slants for weakness. The right slants is the alarm bell of a system, and today the system has been forced to awaken. She stepped away from the podium without waiting for questions or applause. Aurora walked out quietly, leaving behind a hall filled with stunned and reverent eyes. The press conference ended, but its shockwaves spread worldwide. Major news outlets ran their headlines when a cold sandwich changed an entire industry. Aurora Bennett, the woman redefining luxury service. On social media, the hashtag Seat1A continued to spread. Seat1A on countless flights became a spot where passengers took photos, captioning them, "I am not a CEO, but I deserve respect." That evening, Aurora returned to her hotel room by Lake Geneva. She opened her laptop, not to respond to the media, but to write a handwritten letter essay, rare in the digital age. The recipient was a 16-year-old girl in Florida who had once emailed her, lamenting that her guidance counselor told her, "Girls like you should stick to service jobs. Technology is not for you." Aurora wrote slowly, each word deliberate. They will tell you that you do not belong, simply because they have never seen someone like you in that position. Do not let anger consume you. Remember this. You do not need to shout to prove yourself. You only need to stand tall, choose your moment, and never abandon your place. And always remember, you have the right to sit in Seat 1A. If anyone tells you otherwise, ask them, who was this system built for? She signed it, folded the letter carefully. Outside the window, Lake Geneva lay still, its surface reflecting the moonlight. Aurora leaned back in her chair, eyes half closed. She did not need titles, nor the flashes of cameras. She only needed to know that from this day on, Seat 1A was no longer a symbol of luxury, but a symbol of fairness. And Aurora Bennett, the woman once handed a cold sandwich, had compelled the world to bow and relearn two simple words: respect. You have seen it yourself. From a cold sandwich served with disdain, Aurora Bennett turned it into an indictment against an entire system. She did not need to shout. She did not need to cause a scene. With silence at the right moment, she forced an empire to change. But this story is not only Aurora's, it is a question for you. If one day you are dismissed, pushed aside simply because of your background, your skin color, or your gender, will you choose to walk away in silence? Or will you choose to stand tall and let the truth speak for you? If this story touched you, hit like to spread the message. Share so more people can see it. And do not forget to subscribe so you will not miss the journeys ahead, where justice and respect always take the front seat. And before you go, leave a comment. Have you ever sat in Seat 1A in your own life? We want to hear your story.